Good evening and welcome to Theatr Colwyn here in North Wales, hosted by the North Wales Wildlife Trust for their annual Lacey Lecture. And I'm delighted to say that for this lecture this year, we're going to have an in-conversation with Liz Bonnin. Liz Bonnin, you will know, known to so many supporters across the Wildlife Trust. Almost 1 million supporters across the Wildlife Trust now will know Liz Bonnin for the last 5 years has been a fantastic president of the Wildlife Trust. We feel very proud and lucky to have you as our president. And of course, Liz is also a wildlife biologist and broadcaster and a National Geographic explorer. Let's give a warm welcome to Liz Bonnin.
Thank you.
Now, Liz, you arrived here earlier today.
I did.
And you and I were taken seal watching by our brilliant colleagues at North Wales Wildlife Trust. That was fun, wasn't it?
It was fantastic. Straight off the train on a beautiful afternoon, actually with mostly sunshine, to this stunning bay, at the bottom of which we were on the cliff were, I don't know, at least 100 seals hauled out. It was a very peaceful, blissful scene. With young pups and juveniles playing in the water, and it was just absolutely spectacular, the scenery itself and then the ocean spreading out. But more than anything, immediately, these amazing volunteers from North Wales Wildlife Trust greeted us and started to tell us about how well the numbers were doing and how important the monitoring was on that stretch of coastline. And I learned lots of new stuff, as I always do when I do a site visit over the past few years, especially the interesting aspect of things you don't necessarily think about all the time. So when it comes to the offshore wind farms, and they're looking to develop the wind farm a little bit further around the coastline, and when they're doing all the surveys for piling, etc., and the sounds of that reach the coastlines. And in one of the reports, it said, okay, so this is where the decibels will reach, and yes, it will reach this bay, but there are no seals. And this is where the volunteers come in. It's just the sort of data and the monitoring and the observations that they make are so absolutely crucial to say, well, actually, there's loads of seals here. So I learned that. And also the fact that so many keen visitors will bring their kids and their dogs, and they think they're kind of overlooking the bay and things are okay. But, it's up to the volunteers to sort of inform them about how the seals might be disrupted just from the sounds and from people being a little bit too keen by meandering down. But more than anything, it was their passion that really struck me, how much they care for this beautiful part of the world. And they dedicate their time to just helping the Wildlife Trust to build more and more information about these incredible creatures. And then Nia was speaking about, that's the beauty of volunteers and Wildlife Trust staff, this incredible family, really, right, that collaborates together. Collaboration is the word of the century, the word of our time. So it was just gorgeous. And I, for some strange reason, don't judge me, still live in London. I know. So every time I get to escape and join people from the Wildlife Trust, it just fills my heart. It was just a gorgeous afternoon.
It's lovely to see how, actually, whenever you come to a Wildlife Trust event, you can see how you kind of relax into it. And you said before now, it feels like you're coming home to family, which is a lovely
Always feels like that. I'm coming home to my tribe and I turn into a child again, and it's just wonderful. Yeah.
And just before we started this, we were hearing from our colleagues at North Wales Wildlife Trust, from Ewan and from Nia, who were explaining why there's a coracle on the stage, and they were telling us about this brilliant project they've got at North Wales Wildlife Trust, which is all about inviting people in the community to have conversations about the river. What does it mean to them? And even, we had a conversation with the river. I had to go in the coracle this morning.
Should we be sitting in the coracle for this conversation? It's just struck me.
I don't know about you, I'd get too many pins and needles, but anyway. But it was amazing, wasn't it? To hear about that kind of community work that North Wales Wildlife Trust are doing.
Beautiful. And that poem, was it a poem? That kind of conversation between the river and Nia was just divine.
I loved the bit when the river said, sometimes I get restless and I need to stretch my limbs or create an oxbow leg.
And leave oxbow legs in my wake. Ugh, divine.
Absolutely fantastic. But this is a pattern, isn't it? I mean, you have been president of the Wildlife Trust for the last 5 years. It's been absolutely fantastic to have you as president. And you have managed in that time to get round and visit a number of the trusts, 46 wildlife trusts across the UK, across Wales, England,
Isles,
Scotland, Northern Ireland, Isle of Man and Orkney. We did go to the Isle of Man, didn't we? Which was
I haven't been to
fantastic.
them all yet, but when I was thinking about this conversation and how many I've seen, I mean, my time off is my time with the Wildlife Trust. This amazing federation are so kind, and they say, oh my gosh, you're really generous with your time. And I'm like, no, you don't understand. I need it more than you need me, I suspect. And, I've been everywhere from the Scottish Wildlife Trust in the north to the Isle of Wight and Hampshire Wildlife Trust in the south to Manx Wildlife Trust in the Isle of Man to Northumberland Wildlife Trust, which was my first visit and was a very moving, very spiritual experience. And then everything in between, some city projects, some marine projects. It's been extraordinary. I'm a wildlife biologist. I've been a broadcaster for about 17 years now in this space, and what I love about my career is that I get a broad overview of what these extraordinary humans all around the planet are doing to protect our life support systems. And I thought I'd learned a lot, but just to be embedded with a federation as magnificent as yours and to learn from the people on the ground in a more, I suppose, connected way and a long-term way has taught me so much more than I ever imagined. It's been wonderful, and I'm ready and keen to visit even more.
So,
basically.
I mean, that is the pattern, isn't it? Whenever you've been to Wildlife Trust, it's always really important for you to interact with the community, hear about the community work. I mean, yes, we do take you to amazing wildlife places as well, but learning about communities, and it is fundamental to the Wildlife Trust, is core part of our DNA, if you like, that we are a federation of 46 locally run trusts, very much of and from a particular place, which is really important, and certainly I think is a great strength for the Wildlife Trust. And by the way, you've been at a time of immense growth for the Wildlife Trust. We've gained another 100,000 members in the last 4 years alone, which, to put in perspective, is about 3 times the biggest political party in Britain. And in fact,
great comparison, isn't it?
In fact, more the new members we've gained collectively in the last 4 years is quite a lot more than the number that ever voted for Liz Truss to become Prime Minister. Let's just say that as well. But you've been with us in this enormous period of growth and exciting new things happening and so on. But it's all about rooted back into communities, isn't it?
It is all about being rooted back in communities, but I think it's also testament to who the Wildlife Trusts are, made up of, and also, let me do this.
Oh God.
to Craig Bennett's leadership during that time. To his absolute vision and perspective of what is missing and what needs to happen to spread the word, to engage more hearts and minds, married with the fact that, we are facing the biggest existential crisis of our time. And I think whether you're a human that's deeply connected to nature or you're a human in an inner city that isn't, there is an awakening happening, I think, collectively, not only in this country, but around the world, that I suppose speaks to...
It's palpable, isn't it?
It's palpable.
Yeah.
It's calling on our very essence, whether we know it or not. I think everybody in this room probably knows it and is aware of it because you're nature lovers, more than likely, but I think there's something very interesting happening as things get really heavy. And I think that's testament also to the fact that we have more members, there are people sort of reaching out for that connection when feeling that they need it more than ever.
But this whole kind of connection, the way in which organisations like the Wildlife Trust and others try and bring people together at a time when there's other things in life pushing people apart. This is happening, across the UK, but also, of course, internationally, and the importance of nature and bringing people together. A lot of your work has been sort of much more international, and a lot of your work internationally has been with communities, including, of course, Indigenous communities.
Yes, that's been a big eye-opener. And first to say that, when you start out as a biologist or a conservationist, and even how you're taught, traditionally it's about protecting nature, setting nature apart, but that's changed so much over the years. It's about humans. Conservation is about people. Protecting our planet is about people, never mind the fact that we are nature. Since when who started that myth that we were separate from it? So community work has become more and more important, and I've loved learning from you and the Federation about how it goes hand in hand with your work. Absolutely, cannot be separate. And then on the other side of my career, whether we were filming a documentary about caribou migrations or animal behavior, or I began to, oftentimes in really wild, remote places, you're hosted by local communities and indigenous communities who are deeply connected. Not all of them, some of them have been forced to over-harvest and be separate from nature compared to what they used to be, and their ancestors used to be. But many of them are deeply still very connected to nature and have this knowledge. When we talk as scientists about needing long-term data, they have knowledge since time immemorial, as they describe it. So this is the ultimate long-term research, right, that's been passed down over the generations of experiential, lived-in knowledge, and it's a wealth of just things that oftentimes they take for granted. But all this to say that when you work as a scientist with those communities, it's a gift, because you understand how true interconnection works, how true collaboration and holistic thinking on a much wider scale, expansive scales, than we have been taught in Western science. And so I would have conversations with them, aside from the program we were making, and it began to just, really get me thinking about, I was trained as a wildlife biologist. I thought our science is extraordinary, but there are limitations to it. And I learned very quickly that it's based on our cultural biases, and that Indigenous knowledge is another science. It's just built from different cultures and different spiritual beliefs, and it is just as valid. And so I'm working on quite a few projects to first of all showcase those Western scientists who have cottoned on to the fact that this holistic, long-term, extraordinary depth and breadth of knowledge is absolutely crucial if we're going to approach protecting the planet in a more efficient way. And they're collaborating with these Indigenous communities. So I'm making some films with National Geographic Society next year. I've set up an education program as well to get kids in New York to learn about how kids in Ecuador, in tribes in Ecuador, learn. So trying to kind of, spread that message. But also, what I'm really passionate about is the fact that as I've researched this type of knowledge and how, as a true community, they approach taking care of nature. So for example, if they're going to build a wall, they'll ask the cook, they'll ask the children, they'll ask the elder, they'll ask the women, they'll ask the hunters, they'll ask everyone. It's just completely natural to all work together. So it's a bit like our modern society. No matter what we decide, we ask the lawyers, we ask the restaurant owners, we ask the educators, we ask the elders in our society. My gosh, we don't value that knowledge that all older people hold. And so I think it's really important not only to showcase this is really good for conservation, like we can learn how to better protect and reciprocate to nature, but it's also, it allows us to remember who we really are, because we were all Indigenous once. There's evidence of all of us, no matter where we were on the planet, we would describe the stars in the same way. We were all deeply connected to nature, and there was a spiritual aspect to it. I loved what Owen was saying about the river and the mythology. That really speaks to me now. So for me, it's an important story. We're going to get into storytelling. It's an important story to tell for all of us. As I was reading certain accounts, that something happened to me physically, and actually potentially spiritually. There was a remembering that's happened in me about who I really am, what it really means to be human on this planet. So I'm really leaning into Indigenous wisdom as one of my main pillars of communication, because I think it will help us in the transformations that are needed if we're going to succeed in surviving on this planet.
What would you say surprised you most in your work with Indigenous communities? Looking back, what is it that
surprised me most? I don't know about surprising. I suppose I've kind of alluded to it. What surprised me most is how obvious it is what they know. Of course we are nature. Of course we have to reciprocate to our life support systems. Of course we can't over-extract because nature is their kin. Rivers are their kin, mountains, rocks, insects, animals, everything is kin. And it's in their DNA. They go, but of course, it's our family, therefore, why would we damage our family? And they kind of look at you as if you've got two heads when you're going, well, our science says this, and they go, what? And to kind of spend time in the company of humans, same species, who just look at you going, but what do you mean you're not, people in your country aren't connected to nature anymore? What do you mean you don't understand that if we overtake, if we become slaves to these uncontrolled cycles of production and consumption, that you don't understand that we're going to get into trouble? That's really what surprised me, was the fact that we had forgotten so much of that, and that I grew up in a society that was completely devoid of that kind of inherent knowledge of who we are. So in a way, do you see what I mean? The surprise was just, oh my gosh, how did we forget the obvious?
So, I mean, it is interesting. You've made the point how for a lot of Western society, how we've ended up working is sometimes to sort of silo things and think about things separately. So we think about humans here and nature here. We think about, even within the environmental movement, we might think about climate change here or nature here.
Yes,
when of course,
biodiversity loss and climate change are two separate things. Even in the sciences, you're a biologist, you don't talk to the geologists, and the geologists don't talk to the botanists. And there's an Indigenous tribal member who is now a first author in several scientific papers in Peru, who is an anthropologist and a botanist and a geologist and a biologist. Like, when you get to understand what he has learned from his father and his father before him, and he is all of it. And how is it that we have just been trained to separate everything into neat boxes when our superpower is interconnection and collaboration?
And there's one I want to explore with you here, which is what I would call like the local to global, global to local kind of thing. Because we've done it even in this conversation. I'm guilty of it. We've done it in this conversation tonight, is we talked about the local here, North Wales Wildlife Trust. Then we talk almost like in a separate thing about the national, and then we talk in a separate thing about international. And you see it happen in these debates. I've seen it for the whole of my career in the environment sector, that you have one team of people work locally and one team of people work nationally, and other people over there work on international policy. But of course, it doesn't matter. The biggest international policy things like the climate COPs and the nature COPs and so on, they will only ever succeed through delivery on the ground at the local level. So I'm interested in your work, with your interest, the huge work you've done with the Wildlife Trust around understanding, listening to local communities here, and the work you've done with Indigenous communities around the world, particularly in an age of technology and all the problems around social media we know exist, but nonetheless, the ability to build much more connections between local to local communities around the world, and building up, the presence from the grassroots right around the world to try and drive greater ambition in international policy, and indeed for international policy to be delivered locally. What you've been saying there, Liz, is about how we've got so much more to learn back from Indigenous communities. Do you think can we imagine that in the decades ahead we might be able to do that they might be able to break down some of these divisions and actually start building much greater connections between communities around the world and build that more stronger grassroots?
I mean, you've put it so beautifully, and it has to be said that you have had that vision for the Wildlife Trust and have moved in that direction. We now have a much more international facing. I mean, we did, but now you're really, forging ahead with that, and I think that's really exciting. So I think you believe it, Craig, and I believe it's absolutely necessary. It's not so much I hope, it's like we have to. It's the only way we're going to succeed. That and a bunch of other things, that I feel quite strongly about. There is no other way for us to really secure a sustainable future if we must reach. We must broaden the net. We must challenge ourselves to think in a different way. And you've just, what you mentioned there about, we all fall into those habits because, from the minute you're born, you're taught to think a certain way, to silo. I mean, even in my career, no, but you're doing science, so why do you want to do natural history? You have to do one or the other. That's just the way we've been brought up in this society. So it's a challenging thing. And let me tell you, there are some Indigenous people as well only pass on their knowledge through oral traditions, through songs, through regaling sort of the dreams they have, through storytelling. So for them, it's been a real challenge too. And they want to meet us where we are too. So they're trying to write down accounts of their knowledge systems. And it's really hard for them. That's one thing to remember. I mean, they're really having to make a great effort. And the effort that we have to do on the other side is that when you read some of those accounts, or actually when you have a gathering with Indigenous people, there's this lovely anecdote in 2019, there was an event called Flourishing Diversity, where a whole group of different scientists from around the world met a whole group of different Indigenous tribes to share their knowledge systems. And very quickly, the Western trained scientists were like, we've been talking for 2 days and I haven't got a single thing out of this. I don't even know what they're saying. I've asked them a question. They haven't answered my question. There is a very different way in being. And when I'm going to film there in Peru, I've been reminded time and time again, like, you can have your script and you can have your plans, but like, it'll probably all go out the window, and you have to think differently, be differently, slow down, breathe, open yourself up. So that's just to say that as we find our way through, it's going to be challenging, especially with a sort of rigorous, time-dependent way of learning about the world and our conservation initiatives, and also sort of the policies around the kind of the government rules around what we must achieve in order to secure things. All of that's going to have to transform. And it feels quite overwhelming, but it's entirely possible. We just need to lean into the fact that there is no other way. We have got to reconnect to each other. We have got to.
So what does all that mean for wildlife, natural history, broadcasting, but including Indigenous communities? I mean, that sounds like a real challenge there. And where are we going? Huge question, but where are we going with natural history broadcasting? It does feel, wildlife broadcasting, it does feel like things are changing, or it feels a bit uncertain at the moment.
Well, there's a lot of things going on, including just the sign of the times, and the television industry is really going through a great flux at the moment. So that's one thing. Financially...
And please describe that flux, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, what happened was the streamers got on... This is kind of the probably potentially boring stuff about TV, but I'll just say it very quickly for you. The streamers got on board with, got the whole idea of like making these big epic natural history programs with huge budgets and, working under these strange financial models that allowed them to just spend loads of money on things that outcompeted programs on the BBC, for example. And they kind of ran and ran and ran with it, and then eventually the bubble burst. And they've realized, like, actually, we don't need to keep on making new natural history. Viewers keep on watching the same stuff we've done. So now we've lost interest, which speaks to the issue that for me, is the biggest obstacle to any of our transformation, which is adhering to a financial model that prioritizes infinite profit above anything else. It affects the TV industry. It affects our lives in every way, in every which way. Look at it. That is the bottom line that I always come back to, pardon the pun. So anyway, so the industry kind of went through a flux. Married with that is the fact that people like myself went out to just celebrate the natural world. I literally, look, truth be told, I just wanted to make programs about tigers and share the things I've learned about animal behavior. I wanted to park myself in India and never leave and just make lots of programs about big cats. Very quickly, we were at the coalface of what was happening to the planet. So that's been shifting too, right? And it's challenged us to think what's working and what isn't working. At the end of the day, you can make as many programs about wildlife, big cat families, migrations, animal behavior, all the beautiful epic landmark series that Sir David Attenborough has done, which, by the way, have had a humongous impact. It's why I'm sitting here today. I suspect it's why you're sitting here today too. We've had this discussion. Yep. So, it's changed the hearts and minds of millions of people around the world. And look at where the world is going. And behavioral science tells us that personal human stories are the biggest agents for transformational change. In other words, if somebody just shares their own personal story of how they got to a certain place, it creates empathy and relatedness in people that's actually quite magical. And it results in people thinking, well, if they're doing that, maybe I can too. And we know that from the science. The evidence is clear. So how can we as storytellers tap into that to really make a difference when our backs are against the wall? When the crisis we face, in no uncertain terms, is terrifying. And I've lost a lot of sleep over it, realizing and actually being sent out to film the reality of our impact on the world, on the planet. So it's an exciting time. Married with that is this new kind of, the traditional platforms are still finding their way after, like the streamers overtook it, and then, it's a very funny time. But there's also this interesting wave of philanthropic funding, not least with the National Geographic Society, which is helping to fund my independent film in Peru. And maybe, I say this kind of tongue-in-cheek, maybe a lot of ex-fossil fuel execs have made lots of money and now feel guilty and want to give it back to do something good. Grand, we'll take it. Because if it can help to change the world before it's too late, well, So there's this really interesting kind of, and new opportunities on YouTube where, wow, I actually have independence to put out what I really want to put out without a commissioner going, this is too risky, we don't have a lot of money, so we don't want to risk doing something too hard-hitting or not enough this or not enough that. There's a lot of, companies that are risk-averse at the moment. So all this to say that it's a funny time in television. It's also full of new, interesting opportunities. But more than anything, I couldn't be more convinced of the need to evolve the way we do natural history storytelling. And this might sound strange, but natural history programs have to have people first in it. People, 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 people. I feel like we need to tell more lovely personal human stories of the scientist, of the Indigenous person helping to save something, of just people working on the ground. I also feel that as storytellers, it is our role to help every sector in society to be a storyteller, if that makes sense. I say it all the time about the Wildlife Trust. Whenever I go on a site visit to all the amazing trusts I've been to, I'm like, you guys are completely underestimating what heroes you are. Like, tell me again what you're doing here? And they're just taking it as a matter of fact. They're doing something extraordinary, or they've innovated this new way of doing something or finding a solution. And it's just mind-blowing. And the general public don't see it or don't hear from it. So I think there's a really interesting opportunity to just transform storytelling completely. And for people like me, hopefully, who have been trained in it and who can help, to assist conservation organizations to become better storytellers, to challenge themselves, to perhaps throw out the old models of, here's this reserve, there's an X amount of species in it, this is what we've done to protect it, and just feature some of their some of their volunteers or some of their staff members to just tell their story about when I started here, I completely messed up that reserve and then that animal ran away. And just get more personal, get more connected. And I also want to do that in the business sector. I want us all to tell our stories of change. A big bugbear I have, and then I'm going to stop talking because I do ramble a lot, but is what is up with our news headlines? Now, come here, we're not going to get into we all know the reason why, okay? Why we are obliterated with horrendous news constantly to keep our bandwidth minuscule so that we don't have the bandwidth to lean into the reality of what is happening to our planet. It's happening anyway. You turning away isn't going to make it go away. But there's very much a manipulation of what we are being fed every day that is just horrendous, and how we've gotten here really blows my mind. But I want to help us all as a society be at least half of the good news headlines that should be in the news headlines every day. Let us be that ourselves. And I think that's where conservationists, who are inherently good communicators and can really lead the way here by being those good news headlines that we all need and deserve. But then also get all of you to share good news stories too. When we share good news stories, the ripple effect of change builds momentum like you wouldn't believe. And potentially that's why they're not in the news headlines, because certain people don't want change to happen. So I've learned that a lot in the last 17 years in my career. And as much as sometimes I get quite depressed, the fire in my belly has never been stronger. And to be partnering up, working with this federation full of magnificent humans, and I'm working with other organizations, and I'm partnered with a business sector, a new startup in tech that they're looking to do tech for good and also communicate it. I think that's where the shift is really going to happen. We don't necessarily need the traditional channels to assist us in that, in the same way as we used to.
It is funny, isn't it? Because I think for many years, lots of conservation organisations, perhaps, and many other organisations besides, sort of fell into the trap of thinking what we need to do is just broadcast more facts about what's happening in the world, or more facts about this reserve or something. But, it's interesting, 2,500 years ago, Aristotle was writing in his treatise of rhetoric that the best way to win an argument or to convince someone of a particular point of view is, yes, you need the logos, you need the facts and the reason and the science, as we would call it now, but you also need pathos and ethos. Pathos is the credibility of the person speaking, and that could be credibility, yes, because you're a scientist, or it could be because you're particularly from a community, or you're a directly affected community, say by extreme weather or whatever. But you also need the ethos, the emotional storytelling, the connections, the use of metaphor and so on to be able to communicate these. And he was saying 2,500 years ago, to win an argument, to get a point across, you need your logos, your ethos, and your pathos. If you have just one of those, or even just two of those, you probably won't get the story across.
That's beautifully put, and I believe in that wholeheartedly. Yeah.
So we've got to crank this up. Where do you think, if you could cast into a crystal ball, say for wildlife broadcasting, or indeed, for the wider sort of movement of people trying to drive change in the right direction, where would you love us to be in 15, 20 years' time? What might it be looking at? What's the kind of things the Wildlife Trust would be doing in 15, 20 years' time or maybe sooner? I'm not saying we can't do it sooner, but I'd love to get your big vision about how that could evolve over 15, 20 years. And indeed, at the same point, Indigenous communities, what are they doing with that? Or indeed,
do you mean in the communication space?
Yeah, but I mean, yeah.
Well, I think, imagine using social media for good. Imagine really leaning on to the YouTubes and the social media platforms to get us to where we need to be. So I guess my vision is connection, cross-sectoral collaboration, connection. It's just a complete transformation of, again, you do this and you talk about this. Or I think it's about cross-sector collaboration. So the Wildlife Trust are collaborating with a tech company, and they're working together with new satellite technology, and then the conservationists are working together to create a community project that is just moving the needle for creating regenerative farming and making sure that you're monitoring the wildlife and the forests and how native forests are growing. I think it's just about connection. It's a bit like the fungal networks that we've all learned about recently. That was just wasn't that just the most mind-blowing thing? I just feel like human beings need to reconnect to each other in ways that is a bit challenging because we haven't done it for many millennia.
The connections of mycorrhizal fungi.
Well, we're a human network
under the soil,
exactly. Yeah. Yes, sorry. If
linking fungi to
fungal networks,
tree to tree and things like that.
There's all these fungal networks that run underneath forest trees, which communicate through chemicals, but also the trees use the fungal networks to communicate to each other. And if a tree is sick, they will send it nutrients, so they will, or another tree will stop growing because it's getting too close to that canopy. I mean, there's this super intelligent and sophisticated communications network that is just mind-blowing because you just think a tree, but they are just as sentient and communicative as human beings are, just in a different way, and they use fungal networks to do it underneath. And I picture that for us. I picture, how is it that we've become so separated from each other, so fearful of each other, so judgmental of each other, of color, of race, of culture, we have been the propaganda machine of hate and segregation and separation and better than and polarization is vile. And we grew up in it and we never really realized how bad it was, and we have become so abysmally disconnected. And what I imagine is we become that fungal network too. We are humans just across boundaries, across race, across oceans. We're just all sort of figuratively holding hands, touching fingertips across different sectors, and we're all working together. And how that bolsters you is palpable. I struggled a lot making some of the harder documentaries where I did hide under the duvet for a while, and I did have to get therapy just to continue my work, because when I lent into the true reality of what the modern world was doing to our life support systems, when I understood that our planetary boundaries, we have these 9 classified planetary boundaries on the planet, right, that are basically responsible for creating this safe, habitable space for humans. And 7 of the 9 have now been breached and they are in the danger zone. I mean, we are literally destroying our life support systems and we won't survive. And when I learned all about that, I was overwhelmed and I really struggled. But through that, through stopping everything and kind of realizing what we need to do, I began to lean into the economics and systemic failings and all the other things, trying to figure out what it was that got us here. And what I'm trying to say is that despite really going through a rough time, I've never felt more excited about what's possible, because now I know that all the solutions are entirely in front of us and we can do this. And one of the most important things for me, for somebody who kind of really suffered, was to be in community, to just be around people, be around people, but connect with people. And then you just think that anything's possible. And the Wildlife Trust has done that for me. You don't really know how much you have helped me, but I really mean that. I'm not even kidding. Of just going home and feeling yeah, sure, we've got this. We've got this. and thinking, what is it that's changed my mind? Just being surrounded by humans and connecting and sharing ideas and arguing about ways to approach things. Just connecting to each other, it changes everything. I mean, we are a social species, so it kind of isn't that surprising, but I think that's the biggest obstacles to our progression, is that we have become grossly disconnected to each other, and there's magic that happens when you reconnect, and from that, everything can follow.
That's a heck of a journey from just wanting to go out and do documentaries about tigers.
Yeah, I mean, I didn't plan it. I mean, left to me, I would just still be in India telling, but this is the world we've created. Part of me did want to also ignore it. Some of my friends are like, Liz, I know you're making another program about, X, Y, and Z. I just can't. Like, I'm overwhelmed. And I get it. Because our society doesn't take care of us. We haven't been taken care of. So of course we just don't want to lean into all this. We've enough on our plates. I just find it, and it's only because, I was thrown in the deep end of this incredible career. And before I knew it, I was like, oh, wait, what am I having to report on? So I didn't plan this, but I think what I want to tell you all is that it's not going away. It feels really hard. It feels really overwhelming. And we can absolutely do this. But I think we need to just take care of each other through it.
So what would you say? What would be your top recommendations? What have been the things you've learned kind of personally in your career then? If you're saying that the answer to this is building better connections between each other, between us as individuals, between communities, between institutions, between disciplines, between countries and so on, and also the other big part of it is being really, really good at storytelling and so on. What for you are the big lessons that you think you've learned in your career so far that you would like to share then, to invite everyone here tonight to just reflect on?
Well, I think I've kind of expressed most of it, and I think it's also everybody's different, right? This is my particular journey, and I'm a storyteller, so I'm going to work very hard at helping us all to share our stories on different media, because I think that I can help with that kind of transformation. But you're all individuals, and again, it is a big, what we're talking about here is kind of big, right? It's kind of overwhelming. I suppose my kind of core bit of advice, because I can talk about what I'm doing, but it is just for you to have a think about one thing that you can change, or one thing that you can do in your circle, in the way you live your life, that just contributes to, I think, some of the things we've been talking about, if that makes sense. And I think it just starts with connecting to people, maybe join a group of volunteers and start chatting to people, and maybe make one decision of what you're going to do differently that supports the planet. It just starts with small increments, if that makes sense, because I think I can sum up what I've sort of been telling you about what I've learned, but I think it's a very personal thing. But I guess the main bit of advice is we are facing quite a difficult future if we don't all make a concerted effort to play a role in the solutions. And it doesn't have to be anything massive, but we really do need to step up and go, do you know what? I care about this world and I'm going to learn more about it. And it might be a bit hard. Maybe I'll get help with that. I'll talk to friends. Support yourself through the uncomfortable feelings. One of the biggest lessons I've learned is when I was pushing away the anxiety and pushing away the depression and going, oh my God, you're supposed to be happy, aren't you? We're supposed to be happy in life. This is not a good emotion. I went to get help and I was told, this is your body doing what it's supposed to do. It's a really healthy response that you're dealing with. I'm just going to teach you how to process it. And so when I learned to process those emotions so they didn't persist, my bandwidth began to grow. So it's steps, right? Just as I know I'm talking about lots of different things, but I think it helps to point to the fact that we need to start thinking, challenging ourselves to think in all these different, more holistic ways. There is no one thing. There's a network of things that we need to sort of take care of in ourselves and in our community that build into something magnificent when we actually all move in the same direction. I hope I'm making sense, because there's lots of different ideas and kind of different experiences that I'm sharing. But I think one of them is also just to take care of your heart and your mind through a very difficult time. It's scary what's happening, but interestingly, those emotions, if you learn to think of them as just as positive as feeling joyful, you reframe them and then you start building sort of optimism and energy to do whatever you choose to do in your lives that just help to move the dial a tiny bit in the right direction.
Our first question is from the North Wales Wildlife Trust Youth Forum and Ocean Rescue Champions. I think they're up here.
Where are you?
On the left there. And we haven't really talked about marine very much tonight in the oceans yet, which I know is a huge passion of yours as well. So I don't know what, I have no idea. Neither, I should say, none of us know what the questions are tonight, except for the ones I've got in front of me, but Liz doesn't know. Anyway, so North Wales Wildlife Trust Youth Forum and Ocean Rescue Champions. Please do give us your name as well.
Hi, I'm Joanna, and I'm representing today the Youth Forum. And I've got a question, either of you feel free to answer. In your opinion, what do you recommend young people to do to get more involved in projects like these, with emphasis on wildlife filmmaking?
Well, Liz, before you answer, so funny you should mention it, Joanna, this was the biggest theme we had in the questions that came in advance online. So Susie Eastwell asked, what advice would you give to someone who has just graduated and looking to start a career in wildlife conservation? Samuel Child said, looking at the industry now, which is considered to be currently oversaturated, how would you recommend an early 20s aspiring presenter get involved within wildlife filming and presenting roles? We also had Audrey Miller said, what is the best way to encourage school-age family members to take an interest in wildlife career options, please? So there's some there specifically about broadcasting, some more generally get into conservation.
Yeah.
Why don't you kick us off?
Well, when you think about sort of in wildlife careers, as we've alluded to, communications is key and actually more important than just putting it out there than we might have actually thought or prioritized. So I'm on at all the conservation organizations I collaborate with to say you need more resources towards communication, you need to spend more money, you need to hire more people, you need to evolve the way you communicate. So in a way, it's kind of, I consider it one and the same because I happen to be a conservationist who's a communicator. It's a funny time in television, as I mentioned, and things will shift a little bit, but they won't, most likely, the traditional routes into wildlife filmmaking and presenting there won't be as many, and it won't be in the kind of the same ilk. And like, I was very lucky to be trained at the BBC on a science magazine show, and all of that stuff is different. But it doesn't mean I'm not the biggest fan of change. I don't like change, but actually this type of change isn't the worst news ever, and that's because with social media, and particularly YouTube, which is the most viewed platform of all platforms, including terrestrial television, there are huge opportunities for any aspiring communicator. And I also think in that sentence, I would like people to think about how communication has to evolve and change in the same way. So I would advise any young people who are looking to get into this industry not to think in the way that, of the types of presenters they've seen in the last sort of decade or so, to start thinking in a different way. So how can I collaborate with people in my community or with a particular sector to tell certain stories about transformation? Because again, and this is just subjective, right, but it's from sort of my learnings and from collaborating with lots of different experts in this area, communication to do with protecting the natural world is actually needs to be primarily communication about transforming the way we live. It's not to say that you're not going to celebrate wildlife and talk about the importance of wildlife, because at the end of the day, nature is our life support system. But I firmly believe that to make an impact as a wildlife or natural history presenter, you need to be a communicator that knows how to speak about how the way we live is impacting wildlife and how the way we live can be changed in order to protect it, if that makes sense. So again, it's challenging us to think in a much more interconnected, holistic way. And I think that's very exciting. And it might feel weird or seem weird, but I think it has to go hand in hand. And so then I think when lots of people are always asking me for advice about how to get into the industry, and I'm like, when I was your age, I didn't have the opportunity to just make my own stuff, put it out on my own channels, and just go for my life and communicate all the things I feel really passionately about. So it's really exciting. Yeah. And it gains traction. And you can meet young people where they're at on social media with short form. You can make longer form for YouTube. everything in between. There's a real freedom there. So I think become a wildlife presenter. Start, make your own films, play, interview people, get going with it. But I would encourage you to think about the transformation of our society as part of your storytelling. Celebrating and showcasing wildlife isn't going to get us to where we need to be. So if your heart's in the right place, your mind's in the right place, and you really want the world to change so that the natural world can, survive, you need to think about those two things in tandem and start making different films. So potentially you don't look to the traditional routes, the traditional ways. I mean, the stuff I was making, there's still a place for it, but that's not what floats my boat. That's not what excites me. I'm excited about showcasing people in tech and people in business, people who work in finance, but just finance the good stuff. Making programs about donut economics. Have you all heard about donut economics? It's a particular model where it takes into consideration the planetary boundaries model, all of the things that we do in life that protect nature and not destroy it. So basically it's a green donut. We live inside the dough of the donut, and everything we do, all the decisions we make, no matter what we do in life, or what work we do, I'm a cake maker, I make shoes, I work in a bank, every decision we make doesn't exceed the planetary boundaries. So it doesn't cause climate change, doesn't cause pollution, all of the good stuff. And then also, we don't fall short of societal well-being. So we make sure that everybody has a roof over their heads, has clean water, has education. It's a really interesting way of prioritizing the planet and a thriving economy and a thriving society. And just really quickly, because I'm going off on one again, the things that I've learned, but when I learned what GDP was for the first time, and I realized that it was never devised to be a measure of a country's success. The guy who devised it, who came up with the measure, was like, this is a measure of the financial value of all the goods and services that we sell as a country. It is not meant to be a measure of a country's success. Do not use that, because it doesn't take into account the offset of the pollution that production of that material has made, or the conditions of the workers, or how that society is faring. And what did we do? We went and used it as a measure for a country's success. So the UK is the 6th most powerful country in the world according to GDP, and yet we have human sewage and agricultural runoff flowing down all our rivers. Is that success? So all of that is the types of stuff that I would encourage natural history, wildlife, environmental presenters to incorporate into their storytelling. That's what's going to shift the needle. And I'm not being sarcastic, I'm obsessed with wildlife, but I think that's going to shift the needle more than showcasing yet another beautiful species, or do it together. Celebrate that and talk about what needs to happen so that that doesn't become extinct.
Brilliant.
Thank you very much.
And since your question and some of these questions were also about how to get into the conservation sector, I'll just say a couple of other things to build on what Liz was saying. I mean, I do think communications and storytelling is a hugely important skill in this sector, as Liz was saying. But the other thing I just want to say is when I speak to a lot of young people now, is a lot of people will say, oh my goodness, it's just so competitive now. And it is, I recognise that. And for lots of jobs that come up at the Wildlife Trust, we have an enormous number of applications and so on. But I mean, what I would say is just keep trying, just keep persevering. One of the secrets of when you look at biographies of people like me or something, I'll let you into a secret. We never list the jobs we applied for and didn't get. And
True.
And we always list only the ones we got. And, I started deciding about 10 years ago to point out, when I was chief exec of Friends of the Earth, I started saying to young people, I was pointing out that it took me 3 goes to get a job at Friends of the Earth. I was rejected 3 times. And then I finally, a long time later, ended up as chief exec. And I just think, there's a bit of luck in it, as well as perseverance. And I know that sometimes feels really hard if you keep getting knocked back. But I would also advise people, also in an age where sometimes people are now using AI to fill out job applications, just do not do that. It's so obvious, It's much better to do 5 job applications really well and really, really in a bespoke way that say why you absolutely want that job than to do 50 job applications in a cookie-cutter, repetitive way and and just think, it's about the numbers. Actually, I think it's about really, really honing in to the job and the organisation and being really clear why it's the perfect job for you, why it really matters to you, it speaks to your passion, and showing that you've put a lot of effort into that whole recruitment process. That's one thing I would say. And of course, if you can do volunteering, if you're lucky enough to do volunteering and get to know the sector, that's a great thing as well. So I'd recommend those. Let's get some other questions tonight. Who wants to ask a question to Liz?
Or to Craig.
Please put your hand up. We have someone here just in the third row. Thank you.
Hello, I'm Louise, a long-standing member of the North Wales Wildlife Trust.
Thank you.
Louise!
Yes.
Do you think there's a positive role for AI in natural history broadcasting, or are you very nervous about it?
I'm nervous about AI in general. I don't understand how we've gotten to this stage and it isn't regulated in ways that it should have been. That's mind boggles. When it comes to natural history programming, I'm not really sure. Listen, again, I don't like change. I think, people, even on social media, are liking sort of these kind of AI fabrications of like these kind of mythical birds and all the rest of it. I don't particularly understand why we need that when the world is so incredibly mind-blowingly stunning and beautiful and miraculous. I think AI is really useful in conservation, for purpose, for augmenting visuals. I don't think we need it, personally. I don't think it's necessary. If it's about cutting corners and maybe saving money, there's an argument for that, but it just depends what it's used for. For me, what excites me is AI-ready technology that can actually serve people and planet. That's where I'm excited. And I think the same goes for sort of the use of AI to make the world a better place as opposed to the use of AI to save money. There's a very big difference between the two. So at the moment, as I say, I'm collaborating with the business sector a lot, and there's a particular company that's going to be rolling out this new data that I know that I'm going to introduce them to the Wildlife Trusts on this, but that really paints a much more accurate picture of what's happening, the changes on the planet in real time, etc. And for that, AI needs to process that data. That's the kind of stuff that excites me. If you mean sort of for visuals, for natural history programming, why would you want to try and do something other than this mad, ridiculous, utterly beautiful planet? I don't think you can better it personally, but maybe I'm old school. I don't know. What do you think, Craig?
Well, I think you're absolutely right about what you say. The only thing I would say is that you are starting to see some programs now which are trying to imagine what it was like for prehistoric creatures, and that I find that quite interesting.
Yeah, that is quite cool.
But just, if nothing else, to make us think about how the world used to be before humans were around and so on.
Do you need to use AI to do that, or can you just not do it with the
I think it's, computer graphics, and it's, a form of AI.
But it is.
But I mean, there's an interesting question about AI and the use of conservation, which is really important, and particularly around monitoring. And the Wildlife Trusts are using it more and more now, and I think in 5 years' time it will be a huge amount. I mean, at the moment, Yorkshire Wildlife Trust is using flying drones over peat bogs and using AI to look at where the gullies are in it, the erosion is taking place, and to help them to work out where to plug it and to put the little dams in over vast areas to try and stop the erosion and to restore the peat bogs. It's being used more and more in conservation. The thing that I find mind-blowing are these audible, essentially these microphones. You shove loads of them in the soil, and by listening to the sound of the soil, AI can work out the health of the soil, because basically it's listening out for worms, and with a lot of data crunching, it can tell you how much carbon there is in the soil and whether the soil is going in the right direction or not. Or indeed, even just listening to, in the forest, listening to the songbirds and so on. It's really good at monitoring abundance and so on. The downside, of course, which is very well known, is the huge amounts of energy and indeed water it takes to do this processing. Huge amounts of energy for the computers, a lot of water for the calling the computers, and that's really concerning. But what I would say is that as we've learnt in the history of humanity, any new technology can be good or bad. And the real question as to whether it's good or bad ultimately comes down to who owns it and who controls it and what it's being done for. And I would say, right now, that's not looking very good.
Isn't
terms
the
of AI.
owner of Spotify
Dan someone.
has invested many millions that he's made off Spotify into AI for the military.
Yeah.
Lots of people are boycotting Spotify as a result. I mean, he's not the only one. When you mention the water and the energy use, something like, I'm nearly sure it's about 50 or 60% of AI is powered by the fossil fuel industry at the moment. It's set to go down to about 40% by 2040. But again, that's like painfully too far away. So again, it's not to say don't use AI. It's to say, we have to be aware of the interconnected factors that play into all of this progress, and the fact that the fossil fuel industry sort of sits at the bottom of the capitalist model and is looking for every opportunity to just continue, to make this obscene amount of money. And that's the problem with AI too, that in conjunction with the development of it, first of all, the regulation isn't matching it, and secondly, the transition to cleaner energies hasn't happened. Again, it's just all about maximizing AI just to make money as opposed to using it for good, which is why it encourages you to... Did you see that trend on social media some of my colleagues were doing it, and I was like, what are you doing? Oh, here's my Mattel doll of what I do as a profession. Did you see that? Yeah. So they would make you, and it would look like you as a scientist or as a presenter or whatever. And people were just kind of jumping on that trend. And you're like, do you understand how much water that's using, how much energy from fossil fuels that's using? Yeah. That kind of stuff just, is unacceptable.
More questions. Put your hand up if you've got questions. I want to also just see, show me if you might be asking a question, because I want to get a sense.
Answer this little girl's
I will do. Oh, brilliant! Thank you. I absolutely will do. But I want to get a sense how many. Okay, yeah. Let's go to this lady in the fourth row there, in the green top, please.
With the best hair.
Absolutely. And please tell us your name.
My name is Owen, and when you were in the Caribbean on the programs, where was your favourite place?
Oh, thank you for that gorgeous question. And thank you for watching it. Let me think. Where was my favourite place? I'm going to have to say Costa Rica, the Caribbean coast of Costa Rica, because I'd never been. And I'd heard, Sir David Attenborough had told me about when he had visited it many years ago, and there had been a lot of deforestation in the country, and that 20 years later he went to revisit this area where the government and the people had all kind of joined forces to get the forest back. And he went in and he saw the forest was just thick and really rainforesty, and there were all sorts of amazing little frogs, including a frog called the poisoned blue jeans dart frog. So it's this tiny little red frog, and I swear to you, its legs are blue, and it's the kind of blue that look like this. So it looks like it has little jeans on its legs, but it's bright red. And he just saw all of these amazing frogs and all of these birds and this mad sound of the rainforest thriving again. And I got to go there and see what can happen when we all work together to help nature to recover. It doesn't take that much. We just have to give it a helping hand, and then nature just flourishes. So it was a dream come true for me to go there. Really, really amazing place. Yeah, thank you for that awesome
Brilliant question. Well done, Owen. Brilliant question. Is that why you told me to wear these tonight? I was going to wear chinos, but she wanted me to obviously look like a frog.
Yes, because we planted the question so that I could talk about jeans. Thanks very much. That was perfect.
All right, great. Next question, please. There was one over here. Yes, gentleman sort of over on the right. Over on the right, that's it. Thank you.
Hi guys, Liz, thank you for your talk, especially the fact that you brought back spirituality into nature. I love that. That's awesome. That's what we all need to focus on. Right, so I've got a bit of a controversial question. It's about what the UK is pretty much open about. It's a geoengineering. Yeah, so chemical ice nucleation. There is a patent for it. You can be found in the University of Leeds. It's for weather modification. And it's also discussed in the Popular Science magazine. Aluminium, barium, strontium, manganese, polymer fibers, graphene, surfactants, and hosted by coal fly ash. This is to do with the weather modifications that they talk about. What I want to know basically is, are they doing tests? They're doing it in America. There's a guy called Dane Wigington. You can watch on YouTube the program The Dimming. He talks a lot about it, and a lot of states in America are now stopping the geoengineering that is going on. And this is mostly about bioavailable aluminium uptake that happens in plants. It's causing damage to the plants. It's found in the soil. We talked earlier about the mycelium and the networks. It's changing the pH of soils. In plants, it shuts down the nutrient uptake and also shuts down the stomata.
So
in fish, it's found
you've got
in the
a
gills.
question about a very specific type of geoengineering.
The question
here,
is yes. Are we testing the damages that are done by geoengineering in fauna and flora? That's the short basic
Okay, thank
of it.
you very much.
I do not know the answer to that question. I'm not going to lie. I don't know that we're testing it, and I also am not aware of that kind of geoengineering in this country.
Yeah.
But Craig,
So
you can probably speak
well,
to
it's
that.
a huge topic, geoengineering generally, and there's lots of different types
Yeah.
of geoengineering. And I think we could get into a little rabbit hole about a very particular type of it. But I think there's the broad point that is being looked at now is, have we basically been so rubbish and so slow at taking action to tackle the climate emergency? Do we now need to consider these interventions to deal with it? I'll tell you where I'm at on it, is that I think geoengineering is a terrible thing. It's a really bad news, and there's a but coming, but we might have to one day go down that route. And so what we need to do there is, you can have terrible forms of geoengineering, and you can have more benign forms of geoengineering. You could argue, for example, planting trees in an urban landscape is a form of geoengineering. I wouldn't call it that, but some people would, because it cools things and so on. I think what that means is, number one, it is really good to do really careful research about it now. The more research and understanding we have, the better, without actually deploying it. Number two, starting to think and do research now about the very tight international governance mechanisms we need to think about how, when, and what controls there are when it happens would be an important thing. I mean, it's already happening now in various places. So that's the kind of thing that needs to be done. So I think it's right to be doing the research, it's right to be thinking about the governance of it. I think it's wrong to deploy it for quite a while yet. And actually, ultimately, it comes back down to the question, we should be working much harder to stop the climate emergency in the first place.
Exactly. I mean, I'm personally against it, and I'm a bit more emotionally kind of driven than somebody as diplomatic and wonderful as, but I really mean this with real leadership qualities. I guess as a broadcaster, sometimes I get the leeway to rant a bit more because I don't have to do the really hard stuff and speak to politicians as much, and I do need you up a little bit on that. All this to say that it just speaks to the sort of band-aid problems when we haven't really dealt with the root causes of things, and at which point do we, and also then the regulations around it, and we've just been speaking about AI, and we haven't regulated that even remotely enough to get us to this particular point. So it just raises a more important question about, why are we even looking at that option? What is wrong with us that we can't think long-term enough to deal with the root cause?
Exactly.
issues?
I mean, there's a phrase, end of pipe solution, which is, rather than stop the pollution going in the river in the first place, you try and solve it at the end of the pipe. And geoengineering is the ultimate end of pipe solution, really.
If we get to that stage.
But we're not in a good place on this issue. So, let's see. Next questions, please. Just a lady in the row there with the red top, or the mauve top. Thank you.
And then we'll ask you.
And then
Thank you.
right behind.
It's Kate Gibbs. Carwyn Graves has written a book about the Welsh landscape called Theatr, and he observed that 100 years ago there were far more people living in the Welsh landscape and also far more wildlife than today. And I just wondered if you'd like to comment on how it seems to fit with the people and wildlife getting along together.
Well, for me, immediately, you probably know what I'm going to say. The most biodiverse hotspots in the world are those where Indigenous people live in harmony with nature. They know how to support it, they know how to reciprocate, they know how to take care of it, and the last remaining pockets of, real biodiverse areas are all those where Indigenous people live. So that speaks to, different cultures, different communities who understand that it's possible to live in harmony with nature. And that's not just to say like, oh, we all have to become Indigenous and live under trees either. We can absolutely apply that knowledge and all of our amazing technology and live in harmony with nature. It's actually more of an issue of choice and will than it is of how. We know how, don't we? So for me, I don't know about that particular history of Wales, but it makes sense. Something's come into my head. I don't know why I want to talk about it, but it's part of the conversation story as well. We were filming a story in Belize for the Caribbean series. Did you see the bit in Belize? And I learned that a particular conservation organization in the 80s had approached some of the Mayan Indigenous communities thick inside the forest, because they were looking to connect jaguar corridors all the way across, from the north of Central America all the way down to South America. And they asked the Mayans, can you show us where the jaguar goes? And they're like, well, they walk past our village, but okay, we'll show you where they roam and what their territory is. And once they found out about the territory, they were like, right, get out. So they kicked out all the Indigenous people, and they said, we're going to protect this. We're going to make it a national park. And because it's like the most biodiverse area, it's where the jaguar can get all its food. It's a healthy environment, so we're going to fence it off. And all of these people, we interviewed one of them. He had to go live with his cousin, and he tried to set up a sort of an ecotourism business, but he'd just been kicked off. They were never remunerated. They were never given homes to live in. I'm not sure why that's come into my head, but it's just about another example of like some of the most healthy areas are absolutely where Indigenous people live. And also sometimes in conservation we make gross mistakes about how to protect it. It speaks to the fact that people and nature can coexist. We have evidence of it all around the world, and potentially we have evidence of it here too, yeah.
Yeah. There's a lot of systems that work against that, but actually, ultimately, they can exist. Gentleman just behind you. Have you got the mic? Great, thank you.
I do. The power, it's great. Firstly, I want to thank you for answering my previous question from Matt. You ran off your screen. So
great.
I feel a little bit cheaky asking the second one.
What was your name then?
Sam.
Oh, brilliant.
Samuel.
Okay, great.
So I will go out and be a wildlife presenter with time. But my second question is a little bit more on the depressing side, so sorry everybody. But where would you say we currently are on the tipping scale? Because I feel it's been talked about quite a lot, and especially kind of in the filming a documentary sort of side of things, we talk about the tipping scale, and it's kind of, we keep talking about it and being optimistic, which we have to be. We're going, it's a little bit further, but at what point are we now kind of at this point?
And do you want to say briefly, here's your chance to be a presenter, what the tipping scale is? Yeah, tell us in 20 seconds.
So the tipping scale is basically like, at what point have we gone too far? At what point will the Earth not be able to regenerate kind of naturally with all the damage we've done? So a big example is with the amount of CO2 going into the atmosphere and then breaking down the ozone layer. And then that sort of slightly depressing thing, so sorry everybody for that.
Don't apologise. Let's change the rhetoric about saying, oh, here comes the doom and gloom, or here comes the depressing bit. It's just as much of a reality in our world as Wildlife Trust just, protected a new area, and I think it's important to just speak about it as naturally as possible. But by the way, you're a really good communicator, so I need to watch my back. You're right, actually, about the communication aspect, where we're nearing the tipping point, but there's some, that climate change example is perfect. The Amazon only needs to lose about 27% of trees in order for the threshold to be reached, and then there's this kind of sort of runaway effect where the forest can't support itself and the whole place turns into a savanna. And we're at 26.5%. We're desperately clinging on. And when Lula da Silva came into power, the deforestation lowered a bit, but then with climate change, the fires that rip through are now more frequent and more intense. so all this to say that like we are, and also that when I mentioned the planetary boundaries earlier, that for me is one of the most concerning models, and it's from hundreds of scientists led by the Stockholm Center of Resilience and a guy called Johan Rockström, who's an absolute legend. He was at COP30. It is the most comprehensive picture of exactly what's going on, and as I mentioned, 7 of the 9 planetary boundaries have been breached. There's also that the Critical Tipping Point report, which ironically is funded by Bezos and Amazon. I need to ask you what you think about that, because I mean, it's like I can't get my head around it, because it's like, okay, so you're funding this, so you know what the results are, and you still live the way you live, and you still conduct your business in the way that is destroying the very thing you're funding to research. Well, I don't know, but that is another report, which is a collective of loads of countries, there are loads of scientists working together, and we've breached the first, which is where warm water coral reefs are now no longer able to recover. So we stand to lose them. They're just on a massive diet. There's been a kind of a coral bleaching event since 2023 that's just never stopped. Yes, there are cold water corals, and there are extraordinary scientists sort of harvesting the more resilient ones and planting them out. I mean, we are tremendous as a species. We can do amazing things. But this is the first critical tipping point that we have now breached, and we're very close to losing the Amazon, as I mentioned, the ice sheets, etc. I never thought that we would get to this point in my lifetime. So all I can say is that it is really, really bad. And then when the results of COP30, and by the way, this is why I really love hanging out with this guy, because he is much more just pragmatic and optimistic. I tend to go down because it's probably in my nature. But when I saw the final text of the COP30, where there were more fossil fuel lobbyists, and again, I'm not saying this to depress you, I'm saying this to tell you, this is the reality. We need to know so that we can be part of the change, right? There were more fossil fuel lobbyists at COP30 than there were delegates of any country except for Brazil, because it was held in Brazil. And the final text did not even mention fossil fuels. Okay, and there's progress in other ways, and behind the scenes, people are just getting on with it and are not giving up, and that's what gives me hope. That's what makes me. That's why I'm able to speak about this, knowing that we are not giving up. So even though we are painfully close to tipping points where the runaway effect will be irreversible, and we are definitely past 1.5 degrees C, which was the sort of global warming sort of limit that we were aiming for with the Paris Agreement. We're heading for what, 2.3, 2.8, and we're at 1.4.5 now. Anyway, look, it's bad. It's bad. What can I say to you? It's not looking great, and we can still turn it around. However, with Mr. Trump across the pond, who's just opened up the Arctic National Refuge, just as an example. This is amazing, wild. I've never been anywhere more wild in my life. It's in Alaska, and it's just vast, and there's nothing, there's no infrastructure. So you just get dumped from a plane, and you camp, and there's bears, and there's caribou, and you feel the power in your cells, and you just go, oh, this planet is amazing. For the first time in history, he's opened that up to oil and gas exploration. So I swing most days between huge optimism every time I see heroes like people in the Wildlife Trust and this man speak to policymakers and get things moving in the right direction. I swing between that and deep despair. And most of my colleagues, most climate change scientists, most conservationists do swing between the two. I don't think that's really answered your question, but we are dangerously close, and yet we can still turn things around. But yeah, we are really cutting it fine. As I say, I never thought we'd get this close. Yeah.
So we're very close to those tipping points and passing them. But one thing I would say is you get tipping points in social systems as well. And that can work in a bad way, like how a country can suddenly tip to fascism, or it can tip in a good way, like suddenly campaigns for civil rights or campaigns, against apartheid in South Africa. Remembering that quote that Nelson Mandela said, he said, "It always seems impossible until it's done." And it's worth knowing you get these tipping points in social systems as well. And I think what we're about now, as much as anything, is trying to trigger those tipping points in social systems to drive the change we need to avert the tipping points in the wrong direction in our natural systems.
Ever the wise man, and that's where you all come in, because you are part of those tipping points in our social systems. So the opportunity is great and rather exciting.
Let's get some more questions, please. Yes, lady down here, please, if we've not had one from this side for a little while, and I did see a hand up there as well. So if we get microphone runner to, the very back, actually, just right behind you. Yeah, thanks, Nia. So, here, please.
Thanks, Craig. It actually picks up on what you were just saying about finding positive tipping points. I'm desperately trying to find some optimism on the basis of everything you're saying.
What's your name?
It's Beck Collins.
I thought it was. Okay. Hello, Beck.
Nice to see you after 20 years, Craig.
Yes, nice to see you.
We used
I was
to
just processing there.
After
anyway.
20 years?
We used to work together,
Where? At Friends of the Earth or?
University of Cambridge. Actually.
Oh,
Yeah, anyway.
amazing.
Nice to see you. Sorry, everyone else. But, yeah.
Forgive the brief nostalgia and anecdote.
Yeah.
Oh, it's lovely.
Positive tipping point, yeah. So we, as you were alluding to with reference to COP30, we have a crisis of leadership internationally. We know we have a crisis of leadership nationally, as evidenced by the National Emergency Briefing, really, which has had zero coverage. And yet we regularly seem to be presented with national and international survey data that shows the majority of people want to be seeing this leadership from their political representatives. What is it going to take to create that social tipping point such that our political leaders have nowhere else to hide and can no longer obfuscate and put environmental matters on the back burner? Because we know it's urgent, enough people seem to know it's urgent, but they're not getting the urgency. What can we do?
Do you want to start and I'll go first, Craig?
Well, it's in conversation with you, really,
Okay.
not with me.
He's just so much better at this stuff than I am. What's it going to take? It's going to take more of us to decide that we're going to be part of the social tipping point. It's going to take more of us to come together and say no more and be really vocal about it. And you can be vocal about it through marches and demonstrations, but you can also be vocal about it in your community and also crucially, I think, which is why I work more and more with businesses, in your business community. There's a lot of different coalitions happening which excite me, where a certain sector will come together and go, we're going to prioritize different things. We're going to say that this is changing. Birmingham is part of this, the donut economics model, and their local councils have made a decision to just do things differently. Cities like Amsterdam, Copenhagen, Costa Rica as a country, places in India are just local governments, but actually before that, local communities, particularly the business communities, are just deciding we're going to do things differently. And that helps to shift the dial. But as much as it can be, as I mentioned earlier, overwhelming, and it's easier to be there's so much on all of our plates just to put food on the table and just to cope every day with our work and our lack of so many things that we're lacking in our society. I know that it's difficult, but the change will only come with this, what you just said, which is perfect and which speaks to that. It's about the collective. That's what's going to shift. I mean, I also personally think the political system needs complete transformation. It's not fit for purpose, right? But all of that will come with you just doing one small thing to make that voice that little bit louder wherever you live. I promise you that's how the change happens.
I'll sort of answer your question and summing up at the end as well, but let's have another. We're fast running out of time here. So before we get that tipping point, let's try and get. I'll tell you what we're going to do, if we can, just do two or three more extra ones, but we'll hear them all together. So very briefly, please.
Yeah. Hi, it's Jonathan, and you've pretty much answered a load of this already, I think. Communication is a big theme through everything we've talked about. What I was looking for, and you might say you've already said this, is give us all some really positive, good stories of where you've been able to reach the middle group of people. We're all in danger of being very selective around the media we choose, so we can sit there and talk to people, but you're only going to talk to the people who want to listen. How do you get the message to those that aren't listening in the middle ground, maybe in the style that you've already talked about?
Okay, hold that thought, Liz.
I'm
There's
gonna
a
forget all
lady
the
there
questions.
who's just right in front.
You remind me.
We'll get one more.
I just do that. I'm going to be slightly upbeat and very downbeat as well.
Oh, no. Just say the up.
My son went to the Amazon many moons ago and met an amazing woman called, very old, in her 80s, Sister Dorothy Stang in Brazil. And she dedicated her life, she was an American nun, she had dedicated her life to trying to make the ordinary people, they weren't the Indians, they were the poor Spanish, not to slash and burn. But of course, all the loggers and all the people coming in with their cattle were not very pleased about this. And he went up this amazing river with a friend of his and made this film when they were students. And she was just emanated gloriousness through herself. And these people, she was trying to teach them how not to do this and different ways of farming. And it's just individuals like this. And then she was murdered. And this is what keeps on happening to these people who are just incredible. And people get very afraid of doing this sort of thing. And yet there are people out there doing these amazing things. And then they're forgotten about. So we're very comfy here. I know we've got all the pollution and dreadful things, but we must keep these people in mind and their bravery.
Absolutely right. Absolutely right. And the sort of globally recognised term for people like that now is environmental defenders, and there's a sort of increasing sort of recognition of that.
Every year I host the Tusk Awards, which the Tusk Conservation Awards, which just focuses on the rangers on the ground and on the continent of Africa, because there's enough of them and there's enough work to be doing. And every year there's a roll call, a roll of honour for all of the rangers who've lost their lives. And I just did the awards last week, and every year the numbers are staggering, and it covers all the different countries, and the lists are. And you're absolutely right. We mustn't forget them. And actually, again, that should be more of the stuff we speak about and that we're all aware of. But thank you for that.
Yeah, absolutely. Let me come back to you, Liz. The gentleman's question about, so how do we reach the middle, how would you reach different audiences?
Was it a two-pronged question about where do you see the good news and how do we reach them, or?
It was more looking for some, where have you seen it work really well, whether it's in this country or around the world, of reaching that middle ground who aren't listening and get that shift? Because that's where we need it by volume.
I've seen it work really well with conservation organisations who implicitly understand to let local communities lead, to let them have agency over their stories and their conservation. There's a great organisation called, I want to say People's Planet Project, where, so they're filmmakers, but they go in and they first arm's the wrong word, equip Indigenous and local communities with GPS technology, and they train them how to use it. Then they train them in how to tell their own stories. They train them with their camera work, directing, script writing, presenting. Then they go, what stories do you want to tell? So they don't come with a story, they empower. And power, again, is, I don't like that word because it's like giving the power to people who aren't empowered. But they just support in the right way people who need to have agency in their stories and what needs to happen. And through that mutually beneficial, equitable, fair, just, kind, empathetic kind of collaboration, you get momentum. And lots of amazing things have happened in those countries where those types of projects are happening. So another really key aspect is how we as storytellers tell other people's stories in that way. And then we were discussing how, okay, so what commissioner is going to commission that? Like, here's a budget. You don't have a story. You don't know what you're doing. You know, it's an interesting challenge where he thinks, you know, just like we need deep transformation across our society, there needs to be this paradigm shift in how we tell stories. But it creates this beautiful sort of like, again, that kind of what I was saying before about feeling bolstered and feeling like you're really part of something by supporting these people to tell their own stories, and then that kind of transmits in a very positive way at the local level as well, if that makes sense. So I've seen examples of that work really well.
Okay, look, we are out of time now, sadly. But I'll give you just a few thoughts to kind of pull things together, some of the things we've heard here the last little while, and then I'll hand to Liz for some final thoughts as well.
You're better at the final thoughts
Not
than I
least because Ian needs these chairs back, I think, back in his house and so on. But look, it is that question that, how do we deal with the setbacks, the pushbacks? And right now it feels like there's quite a lot of pushback on our agenda and so on. And how do we link it with the positive solutions? And I think the first thing that's worth recognising is that, you only get pushback because of previous successes. We should remember that. Right now, Donald Trump is pushing back on action on climate change and pushing back on a lot of the agenda that many of us will care about because actually we've made previous successes on that agenda. Nothing like enough, but because of previous successes. And actually, if you look at the history of social change, if you look at things like the civil rights movement, if you look at campaigns to abolish slavery, if you look at campaigns for LGBT rights, if you look at even campaigns for stopping smoking in public places and so on, it's not like change just happened in a nice linear way. It's not like William Wilberforce woke up one morning and thought, let's campaign to abolish slavery, and it slowly built. It was when the abolitionists were doing really well in their campaigns to stop slavery. Actually, then a pro-slavery movement formed, and they gave speeches on Hansard in the House of Commons that said if we abolish slavery, it will harm Britain's competitiveness. And all of these things, almost speeches that look identical to those people arguing against action on climate change and nature loss right now. And so the thing to bear in mind is actually this is just how change happens in society. You have to kind of go through these waves. It's how society makes up its mind about something. You have a wave of people arguing for something, and then you get pushback. And then you get another wave for something, and there's pushback. So our job as individuals coming together into communities, as communities coming together into movements, cannot be to stop the fact that these waves are coming in on the beach, as it were. Our job, that's just how change happens. Our job is to make sure each time one comes up, it goes higher up the beach than it's ever gone before. And each time it goes out, we resist and stop it going back down to where we were before. And eventually we get to the high water mark of change. And we do that working together, and that might work on different issues in different ways. We take the positive solutions to push a wave higher up the beach somewhere there, and we resist over on here on something when we get pushback. And eventually we get the change we want. But absolutely key to all of that is communication and good storytelling. And in fact, what I've just done is essentially tell a story that makes sense of these, trying to make sense of these incredibly complicated things. So we couldn't have been more lucky to have been joined by Liz Bonnin tonight, who's an astonishing communicator, astonishing storyteller in helping us make sense of all of these things. Before we give a big final thanks to Liz, just your final thoughts of words of wisdom for the audience here.
I can't match
tonight.
that.
It's to give people something to think about as they go away tonight.
I really don't feel like I can match that. This is why I'm so lucky to be working with the Wildlife Trust, so I learn from Craig every single day. We are all amazing storytellers. We're all multi-talented, so I guess all I want to say is maybe, just maybe, it takes this point in our history to be really brought to our knees, to find the bravery collectively to just go, enough. We are all part of what created this situation. We all have a role to play. If we didn't know, so be it. If we turned a blind eye, so be it. If we were unlucky enough to be born in an area that made us feel that we had no choice but to vote for somebody like Mr. Trump, so be it. We are all part of, in the global north, especially a system that has, for the most part, let us down. But I have never been more convinced in my life that we can turn this around, that we can just remember who we really are. Remember that we are so much more connected and we have so much more in common than what divides us. And to remember that we may have been fed a lot of stuff that has marred our actual true sense of what it means to be human. And I think from that, I would just encourage you all to connect, just to connect more and to hug a tree. I don't say that lightly. It's very powerful. That's all I can say, really. I know I have told you quite a lot of difficult things, but the reason why I sit here, the reason why I want to talk about these things in perhaps an unapologetic way and in a frank way is because I absolutely believe in the beauty and the power of the human spirit that each and every one of you holds in your heart, and that may have been beaten a bit, extinguished a bit, maybe misguided a bit, but I think it's time to just sit with it, remember who we are, and join hands figuratively and spiritually, and become the movement that can shift that dial that Craig spoke so eloquently about. I'll leave you with that.
I think she tipped it.
Ah.
Fantastic. Okay, well, look, we're 7 minutes and 40 seconds beyond our tipping point, I'm afraid, Liz, so we've got to head off. But look, the night is not completely over. Please, after this tonight, do go and visit the North Wales Wildlife Trust stalls upstairs. You've got the Christmas shop, and obviously, if you're not a member of North Wales Wildlife Trust already, please, please, please join. Please join North Wales Wildlife Trust. Become one of 10,000 people who are members of North Wales Wildlife Trust.
There's your step. There's the one thing you can do today, right?
Become of almost 1 million people across the UK that are members of the Wildlife Trust and growing fast. So please, please, please join. They're going to be open for another 30 minutes, or maybe that's 23 minutes now, I don't know. But thank you so much for joining us tonight. Thank you for coming. And let's, I should say Diolch, yeah? What are you going to say?
Cool.
You had a better one though, didn't you?
No, I don't think I did.
Diolch, yeah. And I'll keep doing that Duolingo, and maybe in 2 years' time I know 3 words. But look, let's give a big, huge, huge thank you, of course, to North Wales Wildlife Trust for hosting this tonight. And also a massive, very warm, heartfelt thanks to our wonderful president, Liz Bonnin. I want to say something else.
What the hell?
Liz Bonnin, thank you very much.
Thank you to you. Thank you for coming. Thank you. Did you just forget my name?
Well, no.
Thank you so much.
Thank
Lovely
you.
to see you all.
Thank you.